So, Steve, real quick, we've got folks here who I'm sure have never heard you talk about the differences between the britchen and the Crupper. Would you just take a brief moment to explain why mule and donkey owners want to use a britchen and not a Crupper when fixing up their tack?
Okay, so let's look at the difference. A Crupper goes around the tail. A Crupper is designed for no more than 6 to 8 pounds. That's all. Why is that? That Crupper is attached to the tail, which is attached to bone, which is attached to the spine. All right. And so, where is a Crupper used? A Crupper is used in harness to be able to keep the breeching from climbing up the hip. Now, when you're driving, the hip plate, which is on the very top part of the mule's hip, when you're driving, that hip plate is forward on the downside of the point of the croup. When riding, the hip safe is going to be halfway between the dock of the tail and the point of the croup. All right. Then that balances the breeching and holds it where it needs to be. But since you have harness and the hip safe is forward, what happens is as the mule moves, the breeching climbs up the hip and will create some problems, and your wagon won't stop as consistent as it does with it hanging down. So that's the idea of the Crupper. The Crupper then is attached to the tail, which is attached to the two back straps. And by having the Crupper on there, it keeps those two back straps from pulling the britchen up. That's its purpose. Only reason for designing a Crupper and to use it is in your harness. Now, I can tell you some pretty sad stories of people who that tail got rubbed up underneath here, so they loosened up their Crupper, and then it got up to the tail and it broke it off. And when it broke the tail, it broke the back of the mule, and they had to put it down. I had one year it happened 3 times in a row, and two other people have been riding Cruppers all their lives and never run into it before. One lady, she had raised a baby from a baby and had the Crupper break. Break the mule's back. Now, the idea of a breeching is not to hold the saddle back, but to balance the saddle. There are 4 straps, 2 on each side, that attach underneath the D-ring of the saddle. Those 2 straps help 2 things: keep the saddle from going right, left, and keep the saddle from going forward. But they are, again, only balancing the saddle. The main 2 straps coming from the hip safe, from the spider on the breeching, those 2 straps are actually the ones that truly hold the saddle back. Now, again, we don't want to place everything up on that breeching because of this. The breeching then can conceivably start climbing up the hip because you didn't adjust it, and will allow the saddle to go forward going down a steep hill. So you want to adjust the breeching according to your terrain. And the idea of the breeching is to go completely around the hump, the rump, okay? And it goes around the rump, right and left, okay? And then as the mule moves, the breeching is going like this. I'm overemphasizing it, but that's what it's doing. So basically what it's saying is it's pulling on the saddle, saying saddle stay here, saddle stay here, saddle stay here. You need a breeching, whether you're on flat ground or low hills or whatever. you need a breeching. I was watching a guy the other day that was loping his mule, no breeching on it, saddle sitting directly on top of the scapula, and he was really uncomfortable. How did I know he was uncomfortable? His tail is ringing, his head is elevated because the saddle is setting on top of the scapula. Now, this guy was loping a circle, but the stride was short. He didn't realize that he didn't have a mule uh, focused. He didn't have a mule understanding what he wanted for a nice loping in circles, but there was no breeching. Okay. Yeah. The idea of a breeching is to help balance and hold back the saddle. The main thing that holds the saddle into place is the rear cinch. That rear cinch, when it is placed, it is straight up and down. Front cinch is at an angle. All right. And since it's at an angle, it tends to bring the saddle forward. So with the rear cinch being snug and tight, it helps balance the saddle, but it keeps the saddle from moving around. And then you have a 4-inch strap that goes from the rear cinch to the front cinch. It's about roughly about 4 inches wide. And that helps keep the saddle from moving, the front cinch from pulling the saddle forward. And then the front cinch is attached to the breast collar. So the idea of the breeching, folks, is not to hold the saddle back. It is to balance the saddle.
Awesome. Love giving that out there. A lot of times I would say, Steve, probably the first year that we did this program, we talked about that all of the time. It came up constantly. And then it's been brought up here or there over the last couple of years, but I don't think we've spoken about it much this year at all. One of the things I love about this program, Steve, is that we have new folks joining us all the time. And so there are some folks, I'm sure right now, maybe you heard that for the very first time. And if you have questions about it, or if that goes counter to something that you've been taught, hey, we're not afraid of having the discussion. Hopefully, Steve gave a good argumentation there that made sense to you as to why we say no Crupper and we replace it with the britchen. But yeah, I wanted to make sure to bring that up.